Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Dyck, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here in Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We're very happy you're all here. This is going to be a very exceptional evening, and I will not take up too much of your time. We are gathered here, of course, to celebrate the dramatic return to Winnipeg of Casey Plett. She's here to officially celebrate the Winnipeg launch of not only the reissue of her wonderful debut short story collection, A Safe Girl to Love, which has just been republished by Arsenal Pulp Press, but also well in advance of its actual pub date, her first long-form essay on community, published by Biblioasis. We are naturally very grateful to Arsenal Pulp Press and Biblioasis for publishing these books in the first place and for making sure that this event could happen. We are also very, very happy to be partnering with our good friends at the Winnipeg International Writers Festival to present this event as part of Thin Air 2023. It's always wonderful whenever we have a chance to collaborate with them, and you'll be hearing a little bit more at the end of the event from festival director Charlene Deal. But for now, just a few quick procedural notes. There'll be a reading from Casey from the podium right here, following which there will be a conversation taking place on the stools to my left, featuring host Jonathan Dyck. Following that, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. If you're here in the space, just put up your hand and I'll run over to you with this microphone, which is, I promise, not a comment on your ability to project your voice. It is just to ensure that those people watching at home can hear your questions. And if you are one of those people watching on YouTube, please feel free to write any question you might have into the chat, and we will put them to the author as time permits. Now, the 11 unique short stories in A Safe Girl to Love, Plett's acclaimed debut short story collection, feature young trans women stumbling through loss, sex, harassment, and love in settings ranging from a rural Mennonite town to a hipster gay bar in Brooklyn. Winner of the Lambda Literary Award for transgender fiction when it was first published in 2014, this book is now available in a new edition. And after a long absence, it also includes an afterword from the author. We'll never get tired of dining out on the fact that Casey was working here at the store around the time of the book's publication. And I remember clearly one of those moments of realization when it dawned that the hilarious, humble, and terrifyingly smart person that we worked with was also capable of creating exceptional, fully rounded characters and such evocative lived-in landscapes, all while brilliantly interrogating what it means to simply be and exist among others in genuinely transportive prose. It's one of those beautiful revelatory moments that recontextualizes your view of those around you and writing in general, which is why we're so delighted to have her back tonight. That warm humility, thoughtfulness, and insight also shines through in her first work of published nonfiction on community from Biblioasis, an episodic personal essay. In its pages, Plett draws on a range of first-hand experiences to start the conversation about the larger implications of community as a word, an idea, and as a symbol. I've already rambled quite a bit tonight, so I'm just going to briefly introduce tonight's participants and then turn things over to them. Your host for this evening, Jonathan Dyck, is an illustrator, designer, and cartoonist based here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Treaty 1 territory, the homeland of the Métis Nation. His artwork, writing, and comics have appeared in publications such as The Walrus, The Globe and Mail, Raw View, and Prairie Fire. His debut graphic novel, Shelter Belts, published by Conundrum Press in 2022, won the Doug Wright Award for Emerging Talent, the Eileen McTavish Sykes Award for Best First Book, and the McNally Robinson Book of the Year Awards. These people have won a lot of awards, but Shelter Belts is an exceptional book and richly deserving of all. Casey Plett is the author of A Dream of a Woman, Little Fish, and A Safe Girl to Love, the co-editor of Meanwhile Elsewhere, Science Fiction and Fantasy from Transgender Writers, and the publisher at Little Post Press. Check out the new book, Girlfriends. She has just written for the New York Times, Harper's Bazaar, The Guardian, Globe and Mail, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, the Winnipeg Free Press, and other publications. A winner of the Amazon First Novel Award and the Firecracker Award for Fiction, and a two-time winner of the Lambda Literary Award. Her work has also been nominated for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. Please make a socially unacceptable amount of noise for the truly one-of-a-kind Casey Plett.
Thank you so much for that, John. Thank you all for being here. It is really wonderful to see all of you, and I'm very, very moved that so many of you are here. Because John sweetly spoke of characteristics like humility and me working here, I should tell you a story. When this first book came out, while I was working here, I was on the floor and I was walking around, and I saw someone over in the Prairie Writers section looking at the first version of this book, and he was just like, "You heard anything about that book?" And he was like, "No," and I was like, "She's a local author. She's really good. You should read this." I didn't think it would actually work, but then like a few minutes later, I walked by the cash desk, and Matthew, who still works here, is like, "Guy just came up and bought your book." Said the tall lady who works here was really, so I was like, "Ugh." Anyway, so humble, that's me. So yeah, I wrote this book. I also, I'll read a little bit from this in a second, but I want to talk a little bit about this book that is coming out this fall. Like John said, it's my first book of nonfiction, and it came from, it was a couple years ago when, it was the summer of 2021, so it was sort of like a very fraught time for connection and reconnection, a time when lots of us have been isolated for a long time. I think we're struggling with like what it means to connect with each other, what it means to be a community with each other. And I had done an interview where I said a lot of very somewhat cynical and nihilistic things about community. I was talking about another book that I had written, and I received this. When the interview came out, it was a few months later, and I read it, and I was like, "Oh gosh, I sound very cynical about this. I sound, a little burnt out about the idea of community," which I was and often am. But I thought, that sounds more like. I don't know if that's actually how I feel about things. It was a very strange feeling. So this book somewhat came out that want to unpack things of the fact that community is very important and life-giving and nourishing, and is also dramatic and exhausting and whiny and like full of groupthink and full of like and also just like really, I don't know, really can be really twisted and cruel things, and I both come from a Mennonite background, and I'm also a transgender and a queer person, and knowing how to sort of like community can be both toxic but also irreplaceable on sort of two very different kinds of worlds. Let me describe writing this. Also, fun fact. There's a pitchfork on the cover, which the publishers sent to me as a joke, and I was like, "No, that's great." No, they were like, "I'm sure you don't actually want this, but we thought the design was funny," and I was like, "You were wrong. This is the cover." And the one other thing I'll say is that there was, I'm going to read a little bit from this book, so it feels a little strange not to. I'm going to read one of the few, I tend to write a lot of pretty bummer stuff. I'm kind of a sad writer. I'll read something that I think is somewhat a little bit of an optimistic section of this book. Digital spaces are often derided as leading to the breakdown of society, but I feel like they too are often conveyors of community, even if you're just lurking and not participating. Like a ghostly character says in Emily So's short story collection, Girlfriends, you can almost feel normal about silently watching posts go by online, like you're a member of some chorus, no matter what's going on with you. Sometimes these online spaces are extraordinarily ugly, sure, but I'm not always sure we recognize the sometimes nourishing parts of them. And truly, I think this is sort of an old story that has been the case for a long time. There's an old comic strip that's always stuck with me. It's from Bloom County. It's from 1988. And in the first panel, two characters are talking in front of a television, Opus and Hodgepodge. And Opus is flipping through channels and the remote control is going bink, bink, bink. And Opus just says, cable TV. And in the second panel, he says, in years past, one could watch Jack Benny at 8 p.m. every Saturday night. I know you're sharing the same moment with nearly every other American. And so it's those nostalgic comments that I've always remembered, along with this image of Opus, who is, a very wistful, sensitive protagonist, just wordlessly pressing the remote control. And sort of there was this, as if there was this underlying idea that he used to watch the same show with the rest of the country on Saturdays at 8 o'clock, and he thought this tiny need met in doing so, but like, that's all gone now, or something. And in the strip was setting is spare and darkly lit, as Bloom County often was when it went indoors, and the television is outsized and it's looming in the frame. This reflection of the lonely, detached, then modern world of the 1980s that its creator, Berkeley Breathed, clearly saw. And so I bring this up because I think today in the 2020s, I think the strip tells us two stories. First of all, that indirectly connecting with each other via mass media is not a unique invention of the digital age. And second, that mourning the frame of those connections, to regard the ongoing losses and shifts of mass media as inherently isolating, that's also an old story maybe with its own cycles of worry with each development. Don't get me wrong, I think that I'm sympathetic to the position that the harms of social media are grim and real, and probably in ways we have no idea, that we don't understand, and we have no idea what they're doing to our brains. I completely sympathize with that. But I'm also sort of skeptical of this easy culprit idea that today's digital world is marching us into some sort of isolated doom, because I think social media, yes, but also there were smartphones, and there were desktop computers, and then Walkmans, and then cable TV, and even that very same broadcast era with 3 channels that Opus pines for. They were all blamed at one point as corrosive to the community bonds of the time. There's my friend, as I was writing this book, I was talking to my friend Nathan Dyck, and who used to work at CKMW, the country music station down in Winkler, and he told me this story that he said he would work evenings, and at about 11 or 11:30 every night, he would get phone calls from farmers making song requests. And what he told me, he wrote to me and he said, "We didn't take song requests, and they knew that, but they needed an excuse to talk. I heard from the same 3 guys regularly, but others would call as well. They mostly felt lonely. Sometimes they would cry." And that's sad anyway, isn't it? Like, man, I screwed that up. I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm going to read a little bit from just a page or two from this reprint of A City Pearl Blood. I feel like I've read this book I don't know, multiple, at least 4 or 5 times, in this room, which feels kind of cool. John, you're going to have to tell me what the record is, because I want to break it at some point. Okay, this is from a short story called Winning. He's shivering, Zoe thought, as she came in Robin's bedroom and saw his body vibrating on the bed, a blanket on the floor. She made to tuck the blanket back over him when she saw his face was contorted and his lips were moving like waves. She said, "Hey," and softly rocked his shoulder. Robin gasped, then his face turned instantly black. "Hey, sorry to wake you." "It's okay," he said. "You leaving?" "Yes," she said. "Thanks for letting me crash." "Definitely." "Boy," he yawned, "I feel fucked up." Robin had finished most of a magnum of wine last night. Zoe had had 2 glasses and then switched to milk. She loved milk. It was mid-November when in the Pacific Northwest the panorama of clouds stopped flirting with the sky and moved in and set parking brakes until May. A soft mist patter of rain was coming down as Zoe walked down the motel-like stairs of Robin's complex and got on the bus north. When she got off, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still an ocean of pearl gray. Zoe hated this. Humans aren't supposed to go months with all their sunlight broken, she thought. Back in New York, where she had used to live, she had actually loved the winters. Everyone there always complained about gray, but to Zoe, New York had been sunny and bright. Back at her mom's, Sandy came home, Sandy's her mother, as Zoe was smashing a basketball-sized paper wad into the recycling. And Sandy said, "I bought some fruit for you." And Zoe said, "I'm not hungry." And Sandy said, "Don't give me that. Have you eaten?" And Zoe said, I don't want any fruit, Mom, thanks." And Sandy washed a bag of pears and plunked it dripping onto the counter. She put her elbows beside the bag and massaged her eyes. "You should just tell me the truth, don't you think?" Ever since Zoe transitioned, Sandy had become convinced that her daughter would develop an eating disorder, although Zoe was eating the same amount as ever. And Zoe was like, "No thanks, Mom, I'm not hungry." And Sandy said, "Zoe, it's not like I like having this conversation." Sandy was trans too. Zoe had come out to her exactly 18 months ago on the phone from her Brooklyn apartment after she had already been on hormones for a while. She had meticulously taken steps to avoid telling Sandy about this. And when she did, her mother had cried and cried. Thank you.
Okay, Casey,
Jonathan.
it's so good to have you here, and I'm really honored to be speaking with you here tonight with these two incredible books on community and A Safe Girl to Love. I remember reading A Safe Girl to Love back in 2015. It was during a time when I wasn't living in Manitoba, and a close friend gave it to me and was like, "I think you need to read this." Partly because so much of it is set in Manitoba, and also because I was known as the Mennonite in the group. And it really was a memorable reading experience that established my fandom early on. And it opened up my world in a way that only a good book can do.
Thank you.
I'm sure that most of us at some point over the last few years have thought about community. Hopefully, fearfully, nostalgically, and with any number of other qualifications. I know I have. And I can't think of a better conversation partner than Casey for this fraught but deeply important topic. I really believe that this book is, and I mean this book too, but on community, it's a gift to all of us who grapple with community as an idea and as a formative part of our lives. Those who know Casey's writing won't be surprised by this. On Community is a generous offering of research, criticism, and self-reflection that we're lucky to have. It's both wise and searching, loving and unsentimental, and ultimately I think it expresses the kind of hopefulness that can only really come out of an honest grappling with oneself, one's communities, with all their strengths, their flaws, and their surprises. In short, I'm very excited for this book to become part of a larger conversation about how we're all supposed to live together. Casey, I feel like we're picking up on a conversation that began a few years ago when we first started to correspond. I'd sent you shelter belts and you'd sent me the story Enough Trouble from A Dream of a Woman, both set in places from our Southern Manitoba upbringings. And you said something that I kept returning to as I worked on my final draft of the book, that in a small town where you have any number of overlapping communities, any number of longstanding conflicts or schisms, to use a church word, people still need to find ways to live together, and many of them do. I know you were in just in Morden last night for a book event put on by Pembina Valley Pride, who do amazing work. How did it feel to return to that place and read from that book?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all of that. The event in Morden was cool. It was neat. It was also in the art gallery, which used to be the old library, which I used to learned to read there. So it was felt very sweetly, full circle, and I suppose. And it was also it was intimate, it was like a small space. There were 15 people there, which was still amazing.
That's good.
Yeah, exactly. And so it also felt kind of like a conversation, so it felt very you're just kind of all sitting around. I mean, I was standing in the corner on a podium, but it didn't, it felt very organic, and it felt very communal, you could say.
Yeah.
It was and it was also special because, there's a couple of people my mom, there was one person who my grandfather, rest in peace, who passed last October, and who this book is dedicated to, actually, who he had taught in Winkler decades ago, and so she came up and talked to me and bought the book, and so yeah, that was really meaningful, yeah, I am still still processing that, but it was mostly just a flood of good emotions, some heavy ones, but good ones.
Any special spots that you wanted to revisit, like a local restaurant, like Kettle? I guess which restaurant was it where you said?
Copper Kettle, which is closed, I think, and Tasty's is closed too, and now it's a co-op. Okay. Yeah. Alas. Yeah.
Things change.
Yeah. I know what you're gonna do.
You write books and you can reinsert those things.
See, exactly. That's the point. If anyone's got a budding writer in here, big ups.
Yeah. So it's been almost 10 years since A Safe Girl to Love came out. What's it like to re-release it, and how do you feel about it now?
It was, I was sort of dreading it at first because when they said I was gonna, I was like really like, okay, it's amazing, cool. Maybe I can make some money from this book. That would be great. But then, when I went to reread it the first time, I was dreading it because I was like, oh no, like, am I going to feel embarrassed? Is this going to feel like juvenile or something, And I didn't, I reread it, and I did have some moments where, plenty of moments where I was like, okay, I would not write this way this now. But also I just sort of felt really like warm to my past self, and also like, oh, I couldn't write this now if I wanted to, And I actually sort of had this real kind of like intense realization that of sort of the condescending way that I think we sometimes treat younger artists, younger writers, like where, I wrote that when I was 24 and 25. And again, sure, I would write a different book now, but I also could write that now if I wanted to. It's not like, and I think about a lot of writers who wrote things when they were really young, who like got something and like captured something that, if they had waited 10 years and let it speak, maybe it would probably have been different and maybe not for the better. So it actually made me think really sort of intensely about like how quick I had been to judge my younger self, and how dreading I had been, So it was my, and there were times when I was like, hey, that's good. Like,
well, yeah.
You guys heard about this book? Like,
I mean, and having, read your subsequent books, like Little Fish and A Dream of a Woman, I was kind of expecting, I was like, oh, I haven't read this in a Safe Girl to Love in a while. This will feel different, but it felt like totally consistent. It was really striking to me just how assured and confident you were writing at that point. And I love the afterword too. Yeah, definitely worth picking up, even if you already have a copy. So in that afterword, you describe your first 3 books, all works of fiction, as a kind of trilogy.
Yeah.
And now you're following that up with a longer nonfiction essay. Does it feel like you're setting out in a kind of new direction, or how do you think about the relationship between On Community and your other fiction books?
Yeah, On Community almost sort of feels like a bit of like a detour, like a side project. Where I'm not sure I would do a book like that again. I feel very proud of my community. I'm glad that I did it, and I feel really interested to hear what people say about it and hear what kind of reactions are. I hope that it can be sort of part of some kind of conversation. And it feels a lot different from my fiction books, because I don't feel like I wrote my fiction books to be part of a conversation. And I feel like I actually feel a little, my skin itches a little bit when I hear that implied at all, which some of that is for me to deal with and figure out, but certainly I didn't write any works of fiction in hopes of like it contributing to discourse or natural conversation or whatever, but I really definitely feel that way about this.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I don't know, I felt much more careful writing this in a way that felt cool, and it felt a little more meticulous, where I think I felt with fiction a little freer to kind of be like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Everyone knows what I mean, right? That's very, yeah, thank you. Everyone understands. Okay, great. I think of like writing nonfiction as sort of like very artisan, like I'm going into my workshop in the basement and I'm very carefully sort of like putting some things together, and I'm trying to sort of like, build something that's like kind of has all the edges smooth and shapely and measured right, and everything works. And I feel as fiction is like, I don't know, like some like figure like punches through the ceiling and like grabs me and puts me in the attic and like spits me out 8 hours later, like, oh, that was weird. Like, okay, wonder what happened there. Anyway, I guess I wrote some stuff. That's great. I'm gonna have to go to work now. So they do feel like very fundamentally different processes to me. Yeah, does that answer your question?
That's helpful. And I mean, it leads nicely into the next question I have, which is that when I was reading On Community, I kept having flashbacks to scenes in your fiction, where I felt like the seeds of this new work were already being planted in some of these short stories, particularly with respect to queer communities, but also the Mennonite community. Yeah. So I was wondering how you see the theme of community functioning in your fiction writing.
Yeah, I mean, that's also like, I'm glad you asked that, because the story that I was telling earlier about reading that interview, so in A Dream of a Woman, there's two characters talking about trans community,
Mhm.
and Ava, one of them, says like, oh, you know, that term can mean whatever I want it to mean in that moment. Like basically like, I can use that term to sort of like further my own sort of whatever discursive thing I feel like at that time, which I do feel like is a thing that can happen, is a thing that is true. You want to sort of like, you can take that word and you can kind of like staple it onto whatever pisses you off that day or whatever you want to argue for that day. And so, and when this interviewer asked me about community, I sort of just like quoted that back to him. And I was like, yeah, I think that's true. I think I feel that way. And then when I read the interview back a few months later, I was like, oh, but I don't know if I actually feels a little too easy, a little too cheap. Like, yes, this character does say that, and she definitely does believe that. And I think the other character, the narrator, Gemma, doesn't quite believe that. Thinks like that's probably a little too easy, that's a little too snarky, but I'm not gonna say anything. I'll sort of keep my powder dry. Yeah, like a good man.
Yeah. I love the format of On Community. Even when you were describing kind of the flexibility of the term, I was thinking, you know, I think in terms of page layout a lot of the time, so I can picture the page where you list, you know, the trans community, all the various, you know, possibilities of meaning for that.
Yeah.
But I love how you jump from kind of topic to topic, and in particular, there's one chapter heading that you begin with that you return to throughout the book, assumptions.
Yeah.
And I wondered, why did you want to start there? Why do we start with assumptions?
I think in a lot of ways that's sort of what community rests on, you know? So like on one level, like if you sort of share or a community with something, there are little inside things that you can make reference to or just sort of like assume about the other, and that will connect, and it will catch. And having moved through, I guess a lot of this book too is because I have moved through so many different communities in my life, of like I've moved around a lot, just like across towns and cities, but I've also just like been through part of a lot of different worlds. And I think about just the ways that we speak and interact with each other in ways that rest on assumptions. So that felt like and in ways that can like be really gorgeous and beautiful and sort of life-giving, you know? I remember one to take a really sort of like basic and silly example, and maybe it's not silly, but like when I'm in spaces where I don't have to spell my last name. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
See,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then like, and there's also like, I think about like trans world stuff where there's like sort of like little kind of like inner references or jokes where we'll make, and like the other person just kind of like has like, ah, and it's like nourishing and life-giving in a very specific way, and it happens all the time. We do it all the time. Or in very like also quotidian ways too, like, you know, in New York, I mean, like bitching about the trains, for example, is sort of this like constant infuriating thing, but it's also sort of almost like connective tissue for how just sort of like random people sort of and like acknowledge that they are like sharing a world with each other. At the same time, assumptions can also be like really toxic and really bad and really like gross and really awful, you know, and then sort of can be like the foundation for some really, really intensely like alienating and isolating and really, really sad things. And they're just like part of how we function, right? There's this great book called The Selfishness of Others, an essay on the fear of narcissism. I quoted a few times in the book by Kristen Dunbeck. And she talks, I remember there's a part in that book where she talks about how we have to assume things about everyone else in our lives to function. Like that's just part of how, when you interact with a bunch of people within a day, you have to assume tons of things about how they respond to you and how you talk to them and how what you're saying is landing to them. And we do it unconsciously, and we have to, you know, we have to do it in order to live, you know. I was thinking, I don't know, when I was a kid, like, don't assume, assumption makes an ass out of you and me, And like, sure, I get like the wisdom behind that, but also just like not how human beings work. Like that's just not possible. You have to assume a million things about everyone you interact with day to day, just to like literally for your like brain not to blow a hole in its cortex, you know, and for you to just like get through a day, like in the literal physical sense. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so assumptions seem to tie in really heavily to a lot of what I have to talk about the book.
Well, it seems like assumptions is in particular, like, because so many of them are implicit, they do become this way to distinguish who's in and who's out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, which I love that tension running through the book, because I think you treat it with a lot of ambiguity, like you're recognizing kind of how difficult it makes things for people. At the same time, it is kind of, these boundaries are always there. We're always navigating them to some degree.
Yeah, and also like by definition, like when you include people within a circle, that means you have to exclude some people.
Yeah.
And I think this also ties into why I'm very skeptical about easy ideas of like inclusion or exclusion, which obviously like are really benevolent, come from these really benevolent places and are like rest on, correct morals. Like, don't get me wrong about that. But also like the way it works is that like when you form a community and you sort of like have a kind of meshing with someone, again, sort of by definition, then other people will be on the outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really tough. Like that's really freaking complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think assumptions are sort of like the brain links that make a lot of that work.
Yeah, what you were saying there reminded me a bit of, we talk about in just the world of graphic design, simplifying kind of meanings as a way to make it through our world. We have to abstract, like think of a map, for example. There's not all the information, in a geographic space is visible on that map. But we have to abstract it to some degree. We have to make assumptions about the space in order to make it through, and not to get bogged down.
No. Tell me more about this.
I feel like that's the extent of my idea.
Like that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's just kind of a basic rule in graphic design that often simplification is what allows you to amplify the meaning or to make use of it. Also in cartooning, but.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course. And you couldn't possibly put everything on.
No. Yeah. You're always just kind of deciding what to leave in or how to distill something to just, I guess, close to its essence. Yeah. But anyway, that's where my mind was going when you were talking about that.
That's so cool.
Thank
you for sharing that.
Yeah. No. I was thinking too a little bit about like what attracted me to the metaphor of the shelter belt that I used for my book is very much, I think, it's along similar lines to I think how you talk about community in this really ambiguous way, as something that both closes us in ways that offer us shelter and provide us with sustenance and nourishment, but also, cut people out, create divisions, also make us feel like the world around us is, it can't be changed. And it's movable, yeah.
Shelter belts rules, by the way, you should all buy it. I mean that, I love your book. But like, I think also part of what made me sort of frustrated, made me work on this is that like, I feel like a lot of the conversations I hear, we should make our communities healthier, and we should make it more inclusive, we should do all the good stuff and none of the bad stuff. Like, but I don't, as if, I don't know, communities is salad and take all the salad out. Man, that's fine. But where like those things are actually inextricable from each other.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard thing.
Yeah. And you give it so much attention. I think like those tensions that we were just describing between inclusion and exclusion, imagined mythos, I think you're phrasing, and concrete reality, something that we encounter without community being something we encounter without trying, and something that happens to us, but also something that takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it made me wonder, kind of through the reading process, just because there's so much involved and there's all these difficult dialectical pulls and pushes. Did you ever feel like community itself, like as a concept, wasn't flexible or capacious enough to describe what you were talking about? Like, did you ever feel like you needed to pick a different topic? That's not on the slide on the book.
No. That's I'm really lucky that the answer is no.
Okay.
Like you didn't like throw me into an existential, oh shit, never mind. I don't. No, I actually felt like I had to work to keep the book smaller. Like, I could sort of like keep writing this book my whole life if I wanted to. I could make this 1,000 pages if I wanted to. And so I felt like the more I went into it, the more it kept feeling like it was like a balloon that just like kept not popping, that I kept like putting air into, it just kept getting like bigger and bigger and bigger. And you know, I had one friend who read the book and she was giving me a response to it. And she said, you know, I feel like, you know, the expansive use, like you can sort of like stretch this term to past the point of repair. And I was like, okay, let me think about that. And I was like, I don't actually know if that's true. I feel like this term keeps just like taking on more and more and more weight, and I feel like it keeps bearing that weight, and that is actually like a struggle. That is something I have to like figure out. So yeah, like weirdly no.
Well, that's encouraging. I feel like we're going to keep hearing about community a lot. It's not going to go away.
Probably not.
Yeah. I'm curious, what was the most fun part of the book to work on? Like, was there something that you really enjoyed, a section you really enjoyed, or something you were really excited to finally use or like throw into the mix that you've been kind of holding on to? Probably a few things, I imagine.
Maybe, gosh. I got to read a bunch of stuff that I've always wanted to read, so that was cool. I had a good excuse to like read a bunch of things on my bookshelf. Was there anything that was like, I usually really don't like writing nonfiction. I actually find writing very difficult. I almost never have fun doing it. And once again, getting less encouraging, sad. Apologies for this. Writing sucks. It's not fun. I think what was fun was ended up like the amount of sort of like thinking about the stuff from like my life of references that I was putting in, you know, that I like, there was one page where like I talked about my dad, and then I also like quoted like a Lana Del Rey video, and then talked about like Robert Putnam, and then like Bell Hooks, and then like Samuel Delaney. And so I think that felt cool when I started to feel like, there's like a million different things from a lot of different corners of like art and criticism and writing, and also just like my life and pop culture. And I think whenever I started to realize I could get those things to talk to each other, that felt very, really, really, really cool. My Uncle Garth, who's here, hi, who gave me a lot of really, really good feedback on the book. That felt, it felt cool. It felt cool to sort of like bring together all these enormous sort of like disparate parts of my life and get them talking with each other. Yeah. So I think, I don't know if that was like fun exactly, but it felt neat. It felt neat.
Well, it's very energizing to read. Like you can kind of sense it as you read through the book. Like, I don't know. I was very enamored with all the different sources you were drawing from, and like some of them very anecdotal, some of them, you know, from your own experience, some of them from like dense theory. All Benedict Anderson was great.
That was also like Benedict Anderson and Michael Warder. Like those guys, like, oh man, like I would never like. I hated reading theory when I was in school. I was like, this again myself, and that was actually kind of sort of cathartic because I never understood that stuff when I was in school. And I had a really, really hard time with it. But you know, I'm an older person now, and I am not the person that I was when I was trying to read those things. So it was cool to also kind of like basically like, okay, this is still a little difficult, but I kind of get more of it. Oh, and I think kind of these guys are wrong about something. Maybe I can say they're wrong about things. Hey,
well,
that also felt kind of fun.
It's so clear, like you're, like they seem like really useful sources to draw on. Like you're not just posturing, you're not just picking them up for the names, which is what I used to do in grad school.
Who among us?
Yeah, who could resist? Beef up that works cited page. Yeah. One of the things I liked about your approach to this topic, and that came through in your reading as well, that wonderfully referenced comic strip. Thank you for including that. Yeah. But this resistance to nostalgia, I thought was really interesting because for me, the concept of community is really it's deeply saturated with nostalgia, and so much of the book is speaking kind of in past tense, like you're drawing on experiences, both of your own and of others, And I wondered what that process was like returning to things, but also resisting the nostalgic drive.
Yeah, a lot of this came from like, I feel like I've just sort of entered an age where I've started to identify like, oh, this is like a common thing common sort of like criticism or thing I've heard repeated for years and years that is sort of like an old story, kind of what I was reading from a little bit there, talking about technology. And again, which isn't exactly untrue, you know, like again, I don't know, social media is terrible. I got off Twitter a few months ago and my life is so much better for it. But also again, I think is not as is also kind of again like an old story. Like I remember like again, like I remember reading in Sula, like when there's a telephone and a TV, you know, people don't come by the house anymore. Yeah. Like that's totally real, right? Yeah. Like that's totally, but I also remember like, I don't know, I remember when like cell phones first came around, you know, and I was like, well, no one's gonna talk to each other anymore. And now it's like, no one talks on the phone anymore, you know? And I think I've also just entered the age, I think we're like the same age, right? Like
I think I'm a year older than you.
Oh, amazing, okay.
You're 87?
87, yeah.
86.
Okay, incredible. Where I feel like I've started to like see these cycles, you know? Mm-hmm. And also like, I don't know, like I'm also just, I don't know about you, I feel really great that millennials are no longer the youngest like adult generation. Like that feels so good. Like I'm so sorry for any Gen Zers in the crowd. Like I'm just so glad to not bear the blame for like, I don't know, causing the death of everything anymore. My best of luck to all of you, like good wishes. But I just like, I feel like I started to identify these things and like this nostalgic sort of trap. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, also like, but that is again, also not to say it's not real. Like there is like, I don't know, I think about like dropping in on people or just like surprising, like, you know, like meeting up with people without any sort of like electronic notification where I was like, oh yeah, that doesn't happen in my life anymore.
I can't even imagine how it happened.
Right, exactly. Like, yeah. But like it did, and it wasn't part of life, right? And it was like, oh, that was great. Like that sucks. That's something special is gone. Mm-hmm. But again, I think like it is like such a consistent, repeated process that yeah, I am. There has to be something to sort of like the value and the wisdom of age and remembering what was lost and like making that valuable without also a trap of like nostalgia but also like, nostalgia feels great sometimes too, you know? And again, like there's wisdom in there. So how to sort of like unpick from like the wisdom of those things and also balance it with like, you know, I remember like my old friend Britt Kelly, who has since passed on a few years ago, rest in peace. I also quote in the book. She said like literally like just like the oldest thing in the world is saying like the kids these days, what are they? What's, you know? And so I don't know. I think about that a lot. I am moved that you identified the trap of nostalgia as, I don't know if that was your exact phrasing, but it's in the book because yeah, that was really important to me. Does that make any sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I was just curious. I mean, I find myself getting into that trap sometimes, but I care deeply about the past, you know? Yeah. And I spend a lot of my time thinking about history, Mennonite history sometimes.
Yeah, and you and I both like Mennonite history. You and I both like thinking about it. Yeah.
It's complicated and funny and weird and tragic and all those things.
Yeah.
But, you know, it is also, like many histories, fraught with a lot of nostalgia, and picking those things apart is part of the process of understanding it better. So it's valuable. It is around time for questions from the audience. Are you ready for some questions?
Oh, let's do it.
Okay, cool. John is going to bring around the microphone, so just raise your hand and he'll come by and you can speak into it.
And if you are watching online, feel free to write any questions you might have in the chat.
So a lot of your fiction is written, your characters speak in a very close first person often, or at least it's a close perspective. You're often getting direct thoughts from the narrator. And I was curious about the process of tackling nonfiction, where suddenly you are a character, and now you're narrating. And I was wondering how you figured out the tone for the book and the ways that you, I guess like crafted yourself as a character.
Oh, that is such a good question, because that was one of the hardest things about writing it, for sure. Like you're not wrong. Like I always felt like writing fiction that like a lot of sort of contradictions or like those things could sort of be like not exactly off camera, but could be like teased out or could be shown through reflections or refractions of other characters. Whereas if I'm writing like about me, myself, and then I'm incorporating sort of like more of an omnipresent narrator, or like not omnipresent, what's that word?
Omniscient.
Thank you, yeah, omniscient, yeah. Sorry for regarding to myself as omniscient, that is also not very good way. I apologize. But also with like writing about like a lot of different times in my life and a lot of different sort of like worlds that I've moved in. This up. That was difficult. That was strange. One thing that I think I felt that I tried to sort of do was that there were points even where I would talk about something and then realize, oh, like the person who experienced that might have like had a different thing here or like have a different view on that. And I should probably just like talk to them directly within the book for a line or two. That was sort of how I tried to solve that. Or I really tried to think like, okay, people who were there or people who like knew me as this was happening, would they also like consider that accurate, which feels fundamentally a different thing to deal with in fiction. So yeah, it was hard that it was a new thing, and it almost felt like trying to like learn how to play a new musical instrument or something. I think the thing that I also tried really hard, tried really hard to keep in mind when we published Cecilia Gentili's Faltus at Little Puss. I remember our editor was talking to her and she said, you know, a lot of people when they write memoirs, they try to make themselves look like a good person, and you didn't try to do that at all. Cecilia was like, no, screw that, you know. And a lot of people say like, oh, no, but like she very much succeeded in that in this really admirable way. And I think I tried to keep also that spirit in mind, that if I am concerned about this because I think it's going to make me look like a bad person, I have to sort of like at least like put that thought on ice, and I can worry about it once like the book is off the print or something like that. Does that answer your question at all? Yeah. Thank you for noticing that.
And were there any other questions? Yes.
Hey, Casey.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going great. It's fantastic to see you here.
Good to see you too.
So just a quick question. Do you think you might venture into some more nonfiction? Is there anything that might be starting to steep?
Gosh, I don't know. I can't imagine doing that now, like nothing is on. But also every time I finish a book, or at least it's been true for fiction, like every time I finish, I'm like, oh, okay, that was so hard. I don't want to do that again. I am gonna like, I remember my first two books, I was like, phew, wrote a book, like time to grow up now, time to get my life together, you know, time to be an adult. And after the third one, I was like, okay, so really that's, not to be too self-deprecating, I'm an adult, and I'll have my life together. So like maybe, but I cannot imagine writing any more nonfiction now. Writing things that are true and are my actual opinions, like I definitely don't want to do that again for some time, for a while. Yeah, opinions, not good. Thank you for asking, Jarvis.
Sorry about that. So we do have a question from Sayward Goodhand, speaking of wonderful writers. Thank you for such a wonderful conversation, Casey and Joan. I really liked your discussion on nostalgia and wondered, how is community like or unlike home? And with that in mind, Casey, do you ever think of moving back to Manitoba?
Oh, you know, they asked me that in Morden last night too. I mean, the last one is simple, like yes, all the time. the way that community is like home. I mean, I think people talk about that. I think people talk about those things synonymously quite a lot of the way. I think when somebody, I've witnessed this often, when someone joins a new community for the first time and feels very held by them and feels very good in it, they sort of like, oh, I'm home for the first time. I feel like I'm home. I feel like I've heard that over and over and over and over and over. And then often, sadly, those things are somewhat dashed or leveled or a bit more realistic, as you know, home often does. So yeah, I don't know if I have anything more beyond that to say, but I mean, my first, my knee-jerk reaction is to be like, I feel like the practical way that the terms of community and home are used are if you listen to how people use those words, they're part and parcel of each other for sure. Yeah.
Casey, I love that you had such a delighted response to that cover. Because I guess I did as well.
They had this idea that it was like they were like thought it would like symbolize agrarian bliss or something, and I was like, no, but also the pitchfork, hell yeah. Like I really felt like, okay, look, like if you do not want to put a pitchfork on the cover in the year of our Lord 2023, I completely understand that. Like you don't have to, but also I think this is totally the correct cover we should do it.
So
Yes.
I wonder if you just elaborate a little bit, like what came to you apart from agrarian bliss? Like, why is that the perfect cover?
I mean, I like the so a pitchfork, obviously. So a lot of the book, we haven't really talked about this too much today, which is not the worst thing in the world, but a lot of the book also deals with the question of nationalism and like, which feels like a really like extreme endpoint for how community can be violent and toxic and like literally deadly and bigoted and racist and all sorts of things that are totally gross. And I mean, the etymology even of community and nationalism, like, you know, community, nation, like also those things are very linked, right? So that felt like a decent symbol for like the talking about sort of like the grimmer aspects of community in the book. And I feel like the word community is always used as just like, well, community is everything, and you know, and it's usually this sort of like touchy-feely kind of like what's the word? Almost like uniformly positive way in discourse anyway, and in print, and then privately. So just the image of like the book title saying community, and then something like a pitchfork felt like jarring and striking in a way that pleased me. That felt like, okay, this feels accurate. Like I wouldn't want it to be like, I don't know, what's the antithesis? Oh, I think the original idea I had was just sort of like a bunch of people, like a bunch of sort of like collection of people, but we can't see their faces. We just can only see them like from behind. And it's like, oh, like no, man, I'm so glad they didn't do that. Like, but I definitely didn't want something that was like felt like touchy-feely or felt sort of warm and huggy, because I felt like the word itself would do some of that work. But again, and they said like, oh, you know, we kind of thought it would be like sort of like pastoral or something, you know? And I thought, oh, okay, but there is like, but I can also like, obviously the symbol of a pitchfork is one thing, but also if you like think about it, like, okay, there are other things that are like, this is like something that is used to like, you know, I don't know, something that eventually turns into food for people, you know, like there is like more of like, I did start to kind of appreciate with thinking more like the double entendre of the symbol. So the more I thought and sat with it, the more I was like, yeah, that's good. And I am like an old book publicist, and I was like, oh man, like that would turn a head in a bookstore. Like, okay, cool. Absolutely. Yeah. I want your money for community. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
And we do have time for one more question, if there is one of the others. Yes.
What are the steps that you took to create a supportive community as a trans writer in Manitoba?
One thing that really deeply impacted me very, very early on when I started writing was doing like book events and book readings and noticing how they sort of, without the intention of them being forming any sort of community function, they made a community function anyway, regardless of whether that was the intent, because just to gather a bunch of trans people together, just to do, you know, hang out and do a thing and just like, with no other say necessarily like outside of the realm of say like a support group or like, or a political action or like a sex work related venue, like just to just like, we're just here to like hang out and like relax. Like that's so rare that even if you're just like here for a book event or we're just like doing a reading, it turned into this sort of like meaningful community interaction anyway. And it happens like to this day, like the Biblioasis will do book readings. And so I'm like, wow, I've never heard this many trans people before. And I'm like, man, that sucks that that's still something that I'm hearing, but also shows that it is like valuable if this is happening. And I think when I was a lot younger, including when I was here, there was part of me like, oh, like I don't, this is really relevant. Thank you for asking me this. I initially felt a little resistant to that, like, you know, like I'm a writer, I am not a cultural organizer, I'm not a community organizer. I'm stoked that we do these readings, but I don't necessarily, you know. And then I sort of realized that like, well, these gatherings are happening, and when you get trans people together and you make art together, then that becomes a community space, and that is irrespective of intention. And so then I felt like, okay, this is something that I need to be good to, and I need to attempt to nurture and nourish and like pay some respect to. It actually was like a very much like a turning point in my life when I started to understand that. That doesn't. If you want to talk about this more afterwards, I'm more than happy to. I'm around. Okay. Does that answer your question? Like, okay, cool. I can get deeper in the weeds later.
And that brings us to the end of the Q&A. If you have any closing comments you might like to offer, Casey and or Jonathan, please feel free.
I'd say don't just buy one copy of Casey's book.
You could like, you probably need, yeah, I mean, or like you might need one in your bathroom, you know.
That's very fulsome final comment. Wow, what an amazing conversation. Will you please join me in thanking Casey and Jonathan. I'll read both of those books again. But I have a couple of things that are kind of rolling around in my head, and I really love the cover too. And I was thinking about like the sharpness of the tines of the pitchfork, where, you know, you use it to pull hay and feed animals, but also you can do terrible damage with something that's that sharp. And hearing how you sort of frame that as, you know, kind of the community as being nourishing, which we see in your stories too, the way community and family and relationships nourish, but also injure. So I was just thinking about that kind of concision and the sharpness that I think runs through all of your writing. It's part of your astuteness and your kindness, and part of your kindness is to tell the truth even when it's really uncomfortable, or that's also really kind of unplugged and open-hearted. So I just wanted to say that kind of sharpness is just, it's so essential to us being able to experience the characters in the world as you make them. So I'm really delighted. And the other thought I had when you were talking is, Jonathan, when you said about graphic design, and I hadn't really thought about this before, but that kind of condensation piece and the simplification, which comes with amplification. And I was looking at these two books, and one of them is fat and thick and full of stuff. And the On Community is this like a condensed exploration of the things that you do in your fiction. And it just seemed kind of like there was a relationship there between how much can we get out of something that's really boiled down. And I'm not surprised that it was hard to write, because you have to boil something till you can see the bones to really get what you're doing there. So thank you for both. And it's so exciting to see these two books it's so exciting to hear these two books talked about together, because they do kind of offer us a map to the work that you're doing and the work of community building that you're doing. So thank you so much for what you do and how you invite us all in. It's muchly appreciated. How about it, hey? I think it's worth a pause to just note that we are all gathered here as a community too. And we talked about the book readings, and here we are, right? We are experiencing a kind of momentary community where we're all listening to the same things and kind of making assumptions in our own heads and kind of challenging the assumptions that we might already have in our minds, and figuring out who are we sitting next to and what does it feel like in here. And this place, this store, is like such a hub, a community hub in this city. And I think sometimes we get a little bit blasé about it, but I think if you come in from somewhere else and you know, like, this is an extraordinary place that we have that's here and gathers us, and that we sit in the midst of many, many kinds of stories and experience one another in lots of moments and lots of occasions. So a huge shout out to McNally Robinson, our host, and to John, who pops back and forth from behind the, sometimes talks from behind the screen, and to Chris and Angela, who kind of keep things going. So a big round of applause for McNally Robinson. So we are about, I think, over halfway through our very long festival Thin Air. So we're very excited about tonight, and we've been here several times already. We still have several rounds coming up. So Alicia Elliott will be here on Wednesday. Emma Donahue and Michael Crummy come the week after. In the middle there, next Saturday, John Clausen, a kids writer, is going to entertain us with something scary and wondrous, which is his way. And after the festival kind of winds up, then we'll be back to see Woggy Shake Rice here. So it's quite a great lineup, and we hope you'll come back over and over again. We also do have other events, and I forgot to bring my little program up here, but you know, find the other stuff we're doing. We've got a really great Métis celebration on Tuesday night over at Kilter Brewing, so you could join us there. And we wrap up on the 18th, which is a Wednesday, 2 Wednesdays from now, with the haiku death match, which is not to be missed. No one dies, no pitchforks allowed, but there's lots of pleasant razzing and some really outrageous pseudo haikus. So nobody come expecting like really traditional haikus, because that does not happen there. A big thanks to Arsenal Pulp Press for tonight, and to Biblioasis, who does these beautiful little books. There's a couple of things you need to know, which is you can't move from your seat until Casey has been safely transported to the signing desk over by the cash desk, and you can get her to sign a book before you pay for it, or you can buy a book and then get her to sign it. But either way, you must pay for the book before you leave the store. That's how they do stuff here. And I'd also invite you to pause on the way out and take a look at, there's a sheet back there that has a QR code on it. So if you could make a few comments to us about tonight's event, that's a little survey. We'll just point your phone, you know, these fancy things that we do now. The QR code will take you right to this little form, and you can give us some feedback, which you're always looking for. One more beautiful round of applause for Casey Plett and Jonathan Dyck. Yeah, that would be great. And now we all must stay seated while this mystical thing happens.